Hello students, Eric Magidson here with a Microsoft Excel 2010 Excel Basic Functions Practice Lab. So this is a lab. You have a worksheet that we are going to go through many different functions within Microsoft Excel. So I've opened up that function. I'm going to start with the basic formulas. So this sheet here, we just are going through average. This should be count, max, min, and sum functions. So I'm going to walk you through just a couple of these. And if you notice at the top, the columns have been stair-stepped. And the idea behind this is that I don't want you just doing the first column and then filling over. So I want you to practice being able to do these functions. So let me go ahead and do the first one for you. And if you notice also there's this blank cell in here, and I put those in on purpose. Let me show you why. Before I really go in depth on some of these sheets, doing a part 1 and part 2 video for this, I want you to know, as much as it's fun and makes things look professional when you format great Excel documents, add charts, graphs, etc., most importantly are getting the numbers right. Realize that you may be giving your boss a spreadsheet on time, on overtime, something like that. He or she is going to use those numbers to make business decisions. And I guarantee you're only going to be able to give your boss the wrong calculations once, maybe even twice. But that's going to be it. So consequently, make sure the numbers are absolutely correct. It's so easy to cascade wrong numbers. When I start with a wrong value here and then use it in a subsequent calculation, it's going to create a big mess. So for the average formula, there are these, what I like to call easy buttons. So let me show you how an easy button works. Well, here I would just click on auto sum, choose the average function over the sum function, but look what happens here. It stops at the first blank cell, which means my calculation wouldn't include all of these. Now, there's an easy way to do this. I'm going to go ahead and just delete out of the function. And I'm actually going to type it in. So then I do the parenthesis, and then I choose the range. And I'll just do this by left-clicking with the mouse and dragging all the way to the top. In the parenthesis, you can see the function up here as well, B1 to B47. So that's B1 to B47. I know that's what I want, and I'll hit enter. Now, if I'm going to do other functions on the same range, I can actually come up here and Control C to copy that range, come down here, just say equals count, and paste in the range. It's the same range, right? I just want to count the numbers. There we go. I can say equals max, do the same range. So I'm able to save some time, but I also know that my function is going to be dead on. So there's that. I'll do equals sum. And there we go. Now, of course, again, you're not going to be able to just fill over because it would include these blank cells, and I don't want you to include these. This next function should be from C2 all the way down to C47. So you would go ahead and complete the rest of these. Of course, financial information is hugely important. That's why we have Excel, is to do financial calculations. Here we have a purchase price and the number of stocks we purchased at that price. So this is really easy. We just want a function that equals the purchase price times, that's the asterisk for times, the number of stocks we purchased. And I'll say enter. Now from here, I can go ahead and fill by coming over here to the lower right-hand corner until I get the plus sign. There's the plus sign. Left click and hold my mouse while I drag down. Now, this doesn't mean I'm done. What I want to do is I want to make sure, I'm pretty sure this first one's right. I want to make sure this bottom one is absolutely right. That way, I've audited my work and I know my numbers are correct. So how would I audit that? Well, before I click on that last cell, D12, it should say equals B12 times C12. Let's see if I'm right. equals B12 times C12. I've completed an audit of my data. So make sure you're auditing your data and not just assuming that things are wrong. Assumptions are going to lead to mistakes and consequently wrong data. And what's the value of any data that's wrong? There is no value to any wrong data. So here I want to figure out the current price. I know the total number of stocks and I know the current price over the purchase price. Well, I can certainly either do current price times number of stocks so it matches what I did before, which was purchase price times number of stocks, or of course, because it's a multiplication, I could do number of stocks times current price. But I'm going to go ahead and say current price times the number of stocks. I will fill that down, left click drag. Got to drag one more. There we go. And I will audit this last one. It looks like it should be E12 times C12. Look up here, E12 times C12, so it's right. Interesting. So this value didn't show up. And I know I think it's chapter 3, you learn how to widen the column just by double clicking so that train track says the column is not wide enough to show the value. Now I don't need the column that wide. It's widening that column because of my grand total. Now here's the key, profit or loss. The first thing I need to determine is, should my first number be a positive number or a negative number? And that's really easy to do because a couple ways to do it. Number one, I can look at my purchase total. Well, I spent $4,700 and some change on it, and it's now worth $8,000. So I know I made money, so I should get a positive value here. So if I was to put this in by going current total minus purchase price, I get that positive value. Well, I know it would be wrong if I went purchase price minus current total, because that would give me a negative value, and clearly I have more money now than I did then, right? So the right one would be current total minus purchase price. And now I can go ahead and drag this all the way down. Now notice I didn't drag it down to here, okay? Because if I had drug that down all the way to there, let's see what would happen. It doesn't know what the value is. Notice it's trying to take whatever's in F13, which is text, and minus D13. So that wouldn't be right, correct? So I'm going to delete that one. And what we want to do here is go equals sum, and we want to sum the range of profit and loss. So let's see if I made money or lost money. Well, I got a lot more positive than I do negative. So what do you want to bet? I made some money. On this stock portfolio, I'm currently up $143,585 and change. So let's move on to NASCAR here. It says right here, my directions, can you sort the NASCAR drivers list by points? Can I sort it by points? Well, here's points, and I want to sort the list by points. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of the data, and just the data that I want to sort. From there, I'm going to come up to data, and I'm going to turn on the filter. So once I filter, you can see that with the filter, I could filter on drivers, A to Z. So there's the drivers in A to Z. Now notice, it's going by their first name, not their last name. Why is that? Because there's not a column for the first name and a column for the last name. We'll get into that more in a minute. So it wanted me to sort the list of drivers by points. Well, I'm just going to come here to points, and I'm going to sort it largest to smallest. That way I see who has the most points on top. And so that's pretty much a default, the highest value on top. And all the way down to the lowest value, so I've completed that one. Let's go to NASCAR 2. Can you reduce the list to the bottom 20 drivers based on points? The bottom 20. So that means the drivers that have the least 20 drivers, or the least drivers with points. The least 20 drivers with points. Well, again, I'm going to go ahead and highlight all the data. turn on the filter, go to points, and let's see, I don't see any least here. I don't want to do it by color. Let's go look at number filters. Well, I could filter if it equaled something, doesn't equal something. Ah, here's top 10. Let me click on that. Because when I click on top 10, I get the ability to change that to bottom 20. Those are the players with the bottom 20 in points. So that's all I was asked to do. I wasn't asked to put them in any sort of order or anything, so I'm going to leave it just like it is. Can you sort the list by driver last name and most top 10 finishes? Here's top 10s, but wait a minute. By last name. Well, this tells me that I need to do something with this driver name column. I'm somehow going to have to separate it into first name and last name. And as I go down the list, I see, Dale Earnhardt Jr. That might come and be a problem. Oh, what about Juan Pablo Montoya? Martin Truex Jr. Those have 3. Well, here's what I do. I'm going to insert by highlighting 2 columns to the right of the data I want to work with. Right click, and I'm going to insert 2 columns. Now, why did I insert 2 columns? Because I noticed here Dale Earnhardt Jr. So I'm going to show you the easiest way to do this, okay? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to highlight all of the data. And do we notice some sort of separator between the names? Do we see a separator? Well, there's not a comma, there's not a colon, but there is a space. So maybe if I separate this by the space, I'm going to get what I want. So I come up here, and I'm going to say, under data, text to columns. So text to columns. Is it delimited? Yes, it's delimited. I'm going to say next. It's not delimited by a tab or a semicolon or comma. It's delimited by a space. And notice as I choose space, it's showing me how it's going to put the data. Can you see why right here I needed a Dale Earnhardt Jr.? I needed an extra column for the junior. So at this point I can say next. I could go through more, but I'm now done. I'm going to just say finished. And it is now put and separated the driver's first name, last name, and any juniors or whatever else I might have. So now I suddenly need to change this to maybe driver F name for first name, driver L name for last name, and we'll just call this driver, I can't remember what a junior is called. What do I say? Driver junior, I don't know. All right. So now that I've done that separation, I can now do what I was asked to do, which is sort the list by driver last name and most top 10 finishes. Well, if you notice, if I just use the filter here, I'll highlight the data, I'll turn on the filter. I can certainly do this by last name, A to Z, but then when I come over here to top 10s, and say largest to smallest, we wanted most top 10s. If you notice, now I have most top 10s, but they're not in alphabetical order. Well, does anybody, let's see, does anybody have the same? Well, yeah, Biffle and Boyer. Okay, so that kind of makes sense. 25, 24. Bush is right there. But there's a Bush too. Wait a minute, did they go in the right order? U, Y. They seem to. But to make sure, there's a better way to do it besides filtering. I still highlight the data, but this time I'm going to sort the data. Okay, and the first sort that I wanted to do was, remember, driver last name, and I'm going to do A to Z. Then I'm going to add a level, and I'm going to do by top 10s, largest to smallest. So now I've done 2 filters. I've said put them in order. So if I did have some drivers that had the same exact last name, I would make sure that they're in order by who has the most top 10s. Well, let's see how we do. We'll say OK. How'd we do? Well, it doesn't look like it's what we wanted. Let's try it again. Driver last names, value, A to Z, by top 10. Let's see what that said. Sort the driver list by last name and most top 10 finishes. Well, there's by last name and then most top 10 finishes. So how do we check if this is right? Well, let's go down to Kurt Busch. Here's Kurt Busch. He has 21. He's showing up above Kyle Busch. So 2 Busch brothers, but if we look, they're sorted by who had the most top 10 finishes. Same down here with Gordon. Jeff had 25 top 10s and Robbie had 1. So this is now a good sort. Let's move on to some golf data here. All right, so LPGA. It says what I want to do is insert a function that will return the words under par if, that's the key, if the player's score is 215 or less. Otherwise, return par or over. It's not if. So if the player had 215 or less under par. I'm going to come to the first one and I'm going to say equals if. And let's look at what it says. The logical test. Well, if they scored, was it 215? Let's go back and look. 215 or less. So if this is less than 215, did it say or less? Or less, which means it can equal 215 or be less than 215. So if I3 is equal to or less than 215, what did we say to do? Return under par. Under par. Otherwise, return par or over. So let me double check this. Now, notice I just put text that I want to return. If the value is true, if I3 is equal to or less than 215, is it equal to or less than? It should be true, so it should return under par. Let's go down and read it one more time. I like to be sure. We'll return the words under par if the player's total score is 215 or less. All right, so I'm going to say enter. And it doesn't like something. Let's go take a look. So notice the change it made was less than and equal to. So it wanted the less than first, which is fine, and under par. So here's under par. Well, I'm going to just fill this down. By filling it down, it's going to iterate the values to check. Notice the last one, when I do my audit, it's checking I-80 to see if it is less than or equal to 215. It's not, so it's false. It's returning par over. Now, the big one to check is, let's see if we've got any 215s. We don't. But we do have a 214, which is under par. 216, is that less than or equal to 215? No. So it would be par over. So there we go. Let's look at the next one. Insert a function that will return the word even if the player was even in today's round. Otherwise, return not even. In today's round, well, let's see. Today's round. Here's today's round. Oh, there's an E. So here's how we do this. We just say equals if the value in D3, so we'll say if, parenthesis, D3 is equal to, notice I even gave you a hint there, E for even, right? Then we return, what did it say to return? Even? Even. Otherwise, return not even. Well, in the parentheses. So I get not even there. Is that what we needed to do? Even or not even, okay? So the only one that should come out even are the one that has the value of E in today's round. So let's take a look. There's an E, it's even. There's another E, it's even. And we seem to have done what was asked. Let me do one more for this video, and then I'm going to pause it and do a second part. It says, insert a function in the yellow cell that will return the average total score for players who scored under par, less than 72 in round 1. So they had to score less than 72 for me to put their average total score. So I want to find the average total score for players who scored less than 72 in this round right here. Well, let's look at some keys here. Insert a function in the yellow cell that will return the average score. So I want to do an average if the player scored under par, less than 72 in round 1. So I'll say equals, and there happens to be a formula called average if. Now, what's the difference between average if and average ifs? Well, S is plural, correct? If I have more than one criteria that something needs to match before I'll use it, then I want to use ifs. In this case, I only have one criteria. The player must have scored under par, less than 72 in round 1. So I'm going to say average if. The range, okay, let me show you another way to do this. If you're wondering, hey, what the heck does that function mean? I can actually come up here and go to more functions, and I get a box that I highly, highly encourage you all to use. There's average, but in this box, I'm going to type average if. There's the average if function, and if I read, it says find average, arithmetic mean, for the cell specified by a given condition or criteria. One condition. So I'm going to say, yep, that's the formula I'm looking for. Then it's going to say range is the range of cells you want evaluated. Well, I want to evaluate round 1. So I'm going to choose that entire range, being very careful to select exactly what I want. The criteria, we said they have to score less than 72, not less than or equal to, but less than 72. And then the average range was, we wanted to know the, let's go double check it, return the average total score. Well, we want to average the total score column. So I'm going to come down here and I'll average that up. So I'm going to check range, the F column range for values that are less than 72. And if it's less than 72, like this one here, I'm going to use its value of total score in figuring out the average total score. So there we are. The average total score for players who scored less than par in round 1 is 208.73. Now, I don't care if you leave it like this. We could certainly come up and reduce the number of decimal places. I always like to go to 2. All right, so that's first part. We'll come back and do some more in a bit.